Now, your calls on if it's ever okay to ask what a baby's skin colour will be. Jasmine, it's dominating the front pages today. Of course, it's all based off this book, Endgame. I don't want to focus on those particulars. I want to focus on the conversation itself. Is it the kind of conversation that a lot of people will frown at and say, well, we should never talk about it, but actually a conversation that does actually happen in many families up and down the country?
Yeah, I mean, look, every time someone's having a baby, it's natural for us to say, what will they look like? Whose characteristics will they have? Will they have curly hair or straight hair? Will they be ginger? Will they not be? And also with skin tone and shade, people do discuss what shade they might be. But I think what we're doing is, if we say, as you have just said, we're not going to talk about this story, it minimises the actual story, because if Harry or Meghan are the people who were a part of that conversation, they know in which context it was said. Right. And the word concern was used. And the great thing about this show is, earlier I saw you had Marvin Harrison on, and he made me see it from a different point of view, because he said, well, maybe the concern word was, we might want to protect this baby if they're going to face racism. We don't know what angle it is. Yes, people in my family have talked about the shade of a baby's skin. They've talked about shades of men that I've dated. They've talked about shades of skin of boys that I held hands with whilst I was at school. I remember one aunt seeing me across the road as I was walking down the road holding the hands of a dark-skinned boyfriend, and she actually looked me in the face and continued walking and didn't acknowledge me. And I waved at her and she blatantly blanked me. And when I got home, she'd already called my mum to tell her, and my mum kind of shrugged it off and said it wasn't a big deal. But I now then knew what the whisperings were in the family. And then you don't realise really what the value is or how that's going to affect the person, being me, and the way I now see relationships for the rest of my life. Do I have to protect my friends who are a different shade? You know, my own grandma used to say to me, oh, don't go out and get suntan. You'll ruin your beautiful pale skin. I mean, all of these droplets and little moments and seeds that you're planting in a human being's mind, when you say things like that, the way you behave, it leads to a lifetime of awkward feelings, depression, low self-worth, value, lack of confidence.
OK. Again, I think you pointed out, you know, the context is key to this. I just don't want to get mired into, because I don't think we'll ever know exactly what happened or the context, unless the people involved would like to step forward and set the record straight, which I don't think is going to happen anytime soon. But Geoff, the conversation itself, is it ever okay?
Well, I'd say that it's a particularly tricky conversation to have in the 2020s, which is certainly the most racially aware, conscious, sensitive, whatever way you want to look at it, that I can remember in my lifetime. And like you say, I think it's right to not totally wed it to the royal angle. But what it does prove is that it's very much about how the question is heard as well as how it's said. You know, if there are existing sort of antipathies within a family, that can affect how people perceive it. You know, as Jasmine rightly says, it's the most natural thing in the world is to wonder about this merger of characteristics. You know, who's going to, you know, in my case, is it going to get my wife's eyes or my wife's lips? Hopefully my wife's face, generally. People just seem to generally hope that it would come out looking like my wife. And I wonder if, you know, we talk about skin colour and race. I think sometimes for people, they're just thinking about tone in a way. It's like, what will that blend be between those things? So it can be a very innocent and curious question, but you can't ignore the fact that it can also be a deeply loaded question as well. OK.
Well, look, let's speak now to friend of the show, Wilfred Emmanuel-Jones. Is joining us now. Wilfred, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
I'm really pleased that you asked me to be part of this debate, because I think it's a very, very interesting question. You know, should people be asking the shade of the colours baby? The reality is this, is that if you're from a black family, the shade in colour is something that will always be discussed. And I think you get the sense of how important it is by who is asking the question. And I say what I mean by this is that the lighter you are, and this is why there's concern amongst people, the lighter you are, it feels that the better chances that you are going to have in society. The darker you are, people feel as though that you may face certain challenges. If you take me, I'm of the light-skinned version of being black. I would be seen as having some advantage because I'm lighter than someone who is darker. So I think every single society, whether you go to India, whether you go to China, whether you go parts of Europe, the darker you are, it seems to indicate there's going to be some disadvantage. The lighter you are, people then think actually life is going to be better
Wilfred.
for you. So I think this is what people are not talking about at the moment.
Okay. Wilfred, is this a conversation that you've actually had within your family? Is this something that's come up?
Well, my children are mixed race. And so already they're at an advantage by being mixed race. And therefore, if my partner was black, you'd be looking at actually, if one of your child came out very, very dark and one of them came out very, very light, part of your subconscious will be actually, what's it going to be like for the one who's a bit darker? Because there's a prejudice based on how dark you are.
Okay. Well, look, Wilfred, stay with us because there's people who wanted to have their say as well. Jules has called in from Hampshire. Jules, good afternoon. What would you like to say? Firstly, let me ask you the same question I've asked everybody here. Is it ever okay to have that conversation?
I think, like a lot of people have said today, it depends on tone and how you're saying it. As a woman with 2 mixed-race children, in a very happy relationship, very open relationship with his family, my family. When I was pregnant a couple of years ago, it's one of the things that came up with our baby. I wonder if we'll have really fair skin like myself or really dark skin like my partner. Will she have blue eyes? Will she have curly hair, red hair? I don't think there's any harm in asking anything. And also my eldest mixed race child asked, I wonder if she'll have the same skin as me, or maybe she'll be lighter, maybe she'll be a bit darker. It's just, I think it's all depends on the tone and how you're saying it.
Jules, well, members of your family asked you about the skin tone of the baby that you were going to have.
But that was but that was because I was the first person in our family to have a mixed race child.
Right.
Everyone was very excited. This was something very new. And then she came out really light skin, blonde hair and blue eyes. But now, 4 years later, she has brown curly hair and brown eyes. So.
Right. Isn't it interesting in a way? It sounds like Jules got a very positive relationship with her family. So if you have that positive relationship to begin with, the question comes, it doesn't seem as bad. As we know from the people that this story is based on, that relationship wasn't in such a positive place to begin with.
But, Alex, could I say something here?
Hello? Go ahead.
Yes, I just think the key point we're saying is who is asking the question. Yeah. I think there are certain sections of society that say an aristocrat asking the same question may make people interpret the reasons for asking that question. It's not necessarily out of generosity. It may be coming from a place of prejudice. That's why this has become a big discussion. Does somebody asking this question indicate they may have sort of racist tendencies? And we have to be frank. There are some people from a certain echelon, for a certain background, they're asking that questions for the wrong reasons because there are racist tones to it. The whole debate about skin color really started from the fact that there's racist tones to it, because the darker you were, the more you were seen to be primitive, the more you were seen to be disadvantaged. That's why this has become quite a big, important debate.
Let's move on. Thank you, Jules. Stay with us, Wilfred. Let's speak to Valerie in London. Valerie, good afternoon. What do you make of this whole debate, Valerie? Valerie, can you hear us? We've lost Valerie. Let's try and get Valerie back. Jasmine, do you think who's asking the question is actually very, very important, both with Jules and I know we said we're going to stay away from the royal family, but the questions were asked within the family. This wasn't somebody outside the family. These were relatives.
Yeah, it's not just who, it's why, and what was the intention. So Wilfred rightly said it seems that when you have darker skin that you might not go through life as easier with someone like light skin, but actually it doesn't just seem it. There are whole reports and research with data and statistics that prove that the darker your skin, the less value society has put on you, or the less relevance, or the less people have taken you seriously, whether that comes to education, whether it comes to black men and women in hospitals, or darker skinned people in hospitals, or in the medical world. It's proven that there is discrimination. So instead of actually, let's not just blame people who ask with a racist tendency or intention. Let's look at society. How do we stop ourselves from having these presumptions and prejudices against people?
Yeah, Geoff. Again, I want to stay away from the royal family story. Do you think, again, going back on the who asked the question, someone outside the family asking that question, would that be appropriate?
It all depends on how positive the relationships are
right.
to begin with. You know, where we have, sort of mixed race friendships and families around me. And from what I can tell, the question is incredibly common. I suppose the question, you know, as was rightly said, is it coming from a place of worrying about something being diluted? If you get that sense, then of course it's going to seem like a very offensive question. You know, that word concern, I mean, it's an important word because it's so subjective. Concerned as in interested by, concerned as in worried about some sort of diminution of something within the family. That then drifts into what we would call racism.
But let's put yourself in the position of the woman who is giving birth and her husband. Their parents-to-be, their first child is coming. You, as normal people, would have hopes and dreams for your baby, for your love, your life, your family together. Now, suddenly, there's all these questions about the shade of the tone of your baby, and instead of your overarching emotion being hope and happiness and joy, it now becomes fear and worry and concern about life and society's values that they'll put on the colour of the baby's skin. OK, let's speak to Meg, who's called in from Devon. Meg, good afternoon. What would you like to say,
Hello.
Meg? Hi.
Oh, yeah, my daughter married somebody from the Caribbean. Although he was born in Birmingham, and then when she was expecting a baby, I remember sitting in the garden. She was born in August, sitting in the garden saying, "Oh, I wonder what colour she's going to be, because she won't have to be like us and burn herself to get a suntan. She'd probably be gorgeous and, lovely, lovely colour." And that kind of, comment we were making. We had quite a conversation about it. I can't remember the details now, but it was at the time. It was lovely, and we were all looking forward.
Tone, Jasmine?
It does depend on your tone. But what I would say, Meg, is whilst it's always innocent, remember, people who have brown and black skin also do have to be careful of the sun and tanning, and we do also get sunburnt. So it's not a thing where we don't get sunburnt.
Meg, did your daughter, when you were having that discussion, did your daughter sort of ever take offence, or did her partner take offence?
No, she joined in, thinking, "Oh, thank goodness, my baby's not going to suffer like us."
And her partner as well?
Yes, indeed. And that was the first time I knew that they could have look at his watch mark and be surprised that he had a watch mark from the sun.
Thank you, Meg. So we're kind of essentially, Wilfred, saying that it's all about the relationship you have with your family members, the tone within which this is discussed, and perhaps these are the conversations that are actually happening up and down the country with no problem whatsoever.
Yeah, so what I think the bigger story is that if the royal family, let's get to the point, if the royal family had what I say colour within their family, we wouldn't be having this discussion. It's all about, is this family reflective of wider Britain? The idea that the reason why this has become such a stinging comment, because it's trying to say, well, these people are not like the rest of us. There is some racism about that question that anybody would ask, and it wouldn't have the same sort of connotation. But what it's actually asking us to do is look at, actually, is the royal family diverse enough? And I think if you get rid of everything else, that's fundamentally what this all comes down to.
And it's amplified by the police, the media, because if you look at the way everything about Meghan and Harry's relationship has been projected to the world, it has been projected in a very different way to Andrew and Sarah or William and Kate. And therefore, you can't help but go, well, hold on, that sounds a bit racist, because we've seen the rest of society and British society in the way they've talked about this relationship and this couple.
Okay.
I mean, I do remember at the wedding, the fact of the diversity in the family was broadly celebrated. Yeah. I mean, it has changed since then, but let's not forget that in that moment, it felt like a real step forward and people were generally very positive.
It did, but even before the wedding, look at the stories, look at the comparisons.
Oh, yeah, I'm thinking about Britain rather than sort of column writers.
Yeah. fine.
Well, look.